I'm Rona Rutchik, your host today for Arts Talk, a weekly television talk show about the visual arts. Today's program will be about public art, and my guests and I will help you know more about public art. Have you noticed that art has been cropping up in public places more and more recently? When you go through your day, whether you're in a school building or whether you go to a courthouse, whether you go to an office complex or a park or a center of town, whether you're in a small city or in a large urban area, art seems to be cropping up everywhere. We should not really be surprised, I guess, because art audiences have been just extending and growing every year. Museums have lines all the way around the street for blockbuster shows. And Americans have been traveling to Europe in droves for generations to see fountains and pools and statues and buildings. And so we should be aware that people need art and like art to surround them. Although I wonder if you've noticed that art that had been erected a generation ago in public places used to look a certain way. People on horseback, men dressed in a vest and a pocket watch ready to give an oration at a special time. Commemorative sculptures would be placed in parks or city centers to commemorate times, maybe a military coup, maybe there'd even be a cannon available with some flowers that a civic organization would decorate with. Now, art in public places seems to be made up in media's very, very broad and in styles not only realistic, but including everything and abstract art. My guest today will help us in case you've ever wondered who puts that art there, who suggests and decides what it should look like, where it should go, who pays for it. My guest today, Millie Devine, Vice President of the Sharpe Bank, a trust officer and in charge of two very important private funds that have a great deal to do with facilitating art in the areas that they surround. Evelyn Smith, Deputy Director for the Connecticut Commission on the Arts, who now oversees Linda Dente, who is in charge of public art, Percent for Art projects. But Evelyn, from the beginning of Percent for Art projects, had been in charge, and for the last dozen years or so, has been the one overseeing art in public places in the Percent for Art program for the state of Connecticut. Richard Sharpe is with us today, a private architect from Norwich, Connecticut, who has done both residential and commercial projects in the United States and abroad, but much focuses on urban development and has in fact done Connecticut architectural projects that have included Percent for Art, and he will be able to tell us something about the architect's role in art for public places. Art in public places really is funded in two ways, both the private sector and the public sector, and our guests today represent both parts. Millie, perhaps you can start us by telling us why would a private fund in a bank be interested in getting involved in the public and in the art world?
First of all, let me give a little background as to the two foundations that I represent. First of all, we have the Bowdoin Public Benevolent Foundation, which comes from the earnings of the day newspaper, and also the Frank Loomis Palmer Fund. Both funds have just celebrated 50 years of funding in southeastern Connecticut. We are very interested in the arts and do so in a variety of ways, not only in specific artwork, but in also the music end of things. So that we are involved very much with Eastern Connecticut Symphony, Lyme Art Academy, Florence Grizzle Museum, Summer Music, the Gard Art Center, and we're trying to expose the public as much as possible with the dollars we have available to seeing what is available from all different cultures.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will talk just a little bit later about what the basic philosophy would be, why you would think that money such as that would be best used to nourish a community through art. But let's get the other end of the sectors involved, the public sector. Evelyn, tell us, if you will, when did it get to be possible for public funds to be used for art commissions to nourish the public, mass audiences, as they walk to and fro their day's events?
Well, in Connecticut, the law was passed in 1978, and this was in the context of a number of other states that were passing similar legislation, and the federal government also has a law which enables architects to say that they want to allocate money for art for federal buildings. In Connecticut, the law is 1% of the construction costs or remodeling costs of state buildings that are open to the public. It doesn't impact every building, but it impacts courthouses and colleges and technical schools and many centers where the public comes to state facilities.
And tell us, this happens in Connecticut for these years. Where else is it happening?
Actually, today there are about 200 governmental entities across the country that have what's called percent for art legislation. Sometimes this goes under the title of art in public spaces, or there are names which somehow suggest public art, but there are all kinds of entities, all the way from cities and towns to counties to regional entities to redevelopment districts to states and to the federal government. So it's throughout the country, many places that are supporting public art.
Could you give us just a little description of how a percent for art project happens to involve public people, private people? Who helps choose something like that?
In Connecticut, the work first starts in the State Department of Public Works. They allocate the 1% of the proposed budget for a building. They hire the architect, and at the time that the architect's hired, shortly after that, then we contact the architect to begin talking about the plans for the building. And we carry on a conversation with the architect until the point when the architect is at, let's say, the sort of first third of their work is done.
Let me stop you right there, and let's take a look at a part of a video that has been done for a nearby city, showing not exactly percent for art, but a project where public monies and private monies are used for a restoration of a city that is totally dependent on an art aesthetic idea. Let's take a look at that now, and we'll talk more about the process of funding.
Like many American cities, Lowell has a tradition of monuments, statuary, and murals. But the idea of installing a work of contemporary public art was something new in 1981. Urged on by Paul Tsongas, Miko Kaufman presented a design for a bronze sculpture that would be a tribute to women. Some people call this the Mill Girl sculpture, referring to the countless women who worked in Lowell's textile mills.
In the composition, women are portrayed in their struggle to emerge from the past. The way they bandy together, the way they hold hands, they are surging, they are aspiring to the future.
Battle lines were drawn over the design of Homage to Women. Some people thought the artwork was too abstract and didn't look like real people.
A politician submitted that his impression was that those were some lobsters fighting. That's his interpretation. It may be cute and it may be getting copied, but there are many people who like to let their fantasy work. They like to stand in front of a piece of sculpture and let their imagination contribute to it.
makes the Lowell collection notable is that the works are not only located within an historic district, but they are also thematically connected. They refer and respond to aspects of Lowell's heritage, including its industrial landscape, its artifacts, and the human story.
The public art pieces are contemporary works of late 20th century art, and we're introducing the 20th century into a 19th century setting. The works echo the city. They don't compete with the city, but in fact they form a bridge between a late 19th century look and a late 20th century look.
In 1987, Michio Ihara installed a sculpture whose theme is the power of water.
No matter who you are, where you are, or, on the whole, on Earth, I guess we have a common sense about the form, about the color, sound, the way that people appreciate music. I don't add any so-called meaning on my sculpture. They have to look at it and not understand, feel the piece, just like you listen to music.
The theme of the piece originally was always Lowell's people. So I was trying to do something that would be fitting with Lowell's people and within a universal concept, how through work and through a vision you can build a city. So I think the reason why it's called human construction, which is a rather strange name, but it has to do with that element, with that force that we have as human beings to construct really more than what we can do. So that's why I came up with an image that would be powerful and very simple at the same time. So the simplicity of the uprights and the horizontal pieces, you can't get anything more elemental than that.
What I was looking for was a series of modular shapes or modular sculptural shapes that would seem to represent, well, first of all, Lowell, and I think in a broader sense, maybe an industrial revolution, cities of the American Industrial Revolution. And what I've done is kind of rounded off the shape of a thread spool from the mills into a rounder shape, which is almost like a beehive. And second major piece in this sculpture unit is the silhouette of Francis Lowell, which is something I started to see all over the city of Lowell. I've made the scale such that hopefully it'll draw people to it.
Public art sometimes hits a public nerve, which was the case with the Jack Kerouac Commemorative, one of Lowell's most talked about art projects. Born in Lowell, Kerouac is best known as author of the literary classic On the Road, a spirited portrait of young Americans just after World War II. He also wrote a handful of novels set in Lowell. The Commemorative acknowledges his contribution to our literature.
The peripheral columns deal with the Lowell books, what's called the Lowell books, and the interior columns, to my mind, complete the picture of Kerouac that I was after. And they're more esoteric quotes. They deal with Buddhism and have a more religious overtone. And that is very much prevalent in his books. The cross can actually be the Christian cross. Of course, he was Catholic, and it also becomes the road or the entryways into the park area. The columns themselves form a small circle, and then we have a larger circle that comes out with the larger benches. And in a Buddhist context, it's the whirl of life.
I think they picked out some really good key passages of Kerouac's work to engrave in stone, and there's not many authors that get their work engraved in stone just 20 years after they died.
to have chiseled Jack's words in granite and to place these granite stones in this park in the center of Lowell. This city of Lowell that flows through my husband's books as smoothly as the Merrimack River flows through the city that he loves so dearly. Again, may I thank all of you for making this beautiful memorial possible.
From 1984 to 1989, 6 works of public art were installed in Lowell. In each case, a location and a theme were established beforehand. Artists from around the country submitted their ideas. Then, committees of community representatives and art professionals chose the final designs. Paul Songus raised money for the projects from individuals and corporations. And government agencies like the Lowell Historic Preservation Commission funded several projects. The Songus family themselves commissioned a work by Dmitri Hadzi.
I appreciate everybody coming here. I sincerely hope that you will revisit the site many times and always learn or take something from this sculpture. Thank you.
This is a process. This is not a finished product. So we're at a preliminary stage.
In 1987, Songus assembled a public art committee to begin exploring other ways of involving artists in Lowell's ongoing development. Public art consultant Patricia Fuller helped shape the new strategy.
Lowell struck me as a very particular kind of place where certain conditions existed where I thought some really interesting public art could be explored. And I think what works in Lowell wouldn't work in another community necessarily. What would be right for one community might not make any sense at all in Lowell, and I think that's the whole point, really.
I would ask you all to keep in mind at least these 4 questions, and maybe you all have 4 or 5 of your own. 1, how can public art be kept alive? How can it remain a living entity within a community? 2, can profound content be directly addressed without trivializing it? 3, can art help to explicate historical and contemporary culture for the people who visit this community and, in some ways, as importantly, the people who live in this community? That is to say, can this be a real educational resource? I in fact believe so, but 4, if so, what mechanisms need to be developed as part of this planning process which can operate in concert with the art once it's commissioned and put in place?
Well, Evelyn, you were talking about the selection process, and now that we see this tape that Lowell, Massachusetts is so proud of, and so many cities actually use in order to get their people behind art projects. The 4 questions asked at the end are kinds of notions that selection committees grapple with. How well does the selection committee work? Do they, for instance, collaborate with the architect? In fact, Dick, why don't you answer that kind of question?
I think to begin with, in general, the selection committee, the selection process has been a very dynamic kind of experience. There's a lot of different points of view that come together to try to select or to focus on perhaps half a dozen potential candidates to review. And there's a struggle that goes on in reviewing 200, 300, or 400 different artists to try to narrow it down to a few to begin with, and at that point then to debate internally about what the best candidates really are and getting it going. For me, I found it to be a very exhilarating, a very provoking kind of occasion, because there's so much varied interest that comes to focus on a particular task.
Now, when you design a building and you know that there's going to be % for art in it, you do not know early on whether or not that % for art is going to be used for something like a piece of stone sculpture outside or pieces on the walls for the interior. At what point can you direct Evelyn or Linda, whoever is in charge of it at the time, to direct the selection committee to look at certain kinds of pieces?
I think there's several issues involved. I think as we're in the process of putting the building program together, now that we are aware of the process and we have some experience behind us, I think we're more sensitive in the beginning to some opportunity alternatives. And so the early conversations with someone from the Arts Commission are to explore those opportunities in general and to sense which of them are more likely to be good candidates, good possibilities. And that gives the staffing at the Arts Commission perhaps a better way of going through their vast collection and narrowing it down to 200 or 300 possible candidates.
Now, let's get this straight. Who are these people? Are they men on the street kind of people, or are they arts professionals? Who's helping make these decisions to spend this money in a visual kind of way?
Well, it begins, first of all, staffing from the Arts Commission. Secondly, the agency, and that probably is the most important part of it of all, because they are, if you will, the user. In one recent project we did, there was a combination of faculty, administration, and students.
The user on the site, you mean?
Yeah. Tungus Community College, the president of the college, the chairman of the art department, one of the students from the art department itself. Then there were 2 people from my office, and then several people on staff from the Arts Commission.
And those are the people who help make that decision.
Yeah.
Now, Evelyn, what about when it's in the middle of a town, a courthouse, say, and you've got an architect who comes in with his notion of what he thinks should be appropriate to his design of his building? Who do you have on a selection process that has to do with the town, that has not perhaps to do with the use of the courthouse and maybe not to do with the design of the building, but who walk by it, who live in the town, who want to have some emotional response to what it looks like outside of a building?
Well, usually we'll choose someone who's active in the community. Or we may choose someone from our board who represents that community. And, for instance, you worked on a case here at the New London Courthouse, which is a courthouse which represents all the 13 towns in New London County. So that we try to get people who are sensitive to the community. We try to get the users of the building. We also have arts professionals who are accustomed to looking at art and sifting through various possibilities.
Now, when you get these people together and they decide on something, how often do you hit on something that gets built, paid for, and erected that you have a whole lot of public annoyed in a controversy?
It happens. I think it's part of the issues that surround public art. I think anything that's put into the public domain, the public has a sense of ownership and they want to discuss it. This is a democracy. I think that a good public discussion is a good thing. And I think there's controversy when public art goes in. We've also discovered that there is controversy when a work of art that's been there for a while leaves. So you get a sense that the public has a sense of ownership and territoriality about their public space.
Millie, when you and your group decide on spending $500,000 to facilitate an arts project, do you get feedback, public controversy?
Oh, yes, very definitely.
Sure, I would think that you would.
We announce our grants in the local paper, and so as soon as those grants are announced, we start getting phone calls.
Not only are people's feathers ruffled that the money didn't go toward their project,
that's right,
but is it so that they're not so sure that those that you chose are the best way to spend the money?
Oh yes, there's a lot of second guessing. There's always second guessing.
And how do you make that distinction, the decision on should it be my project, should it be his project, should it be her project?
What we generally try to do is to, we have a committee of 5 people in the community, in addition to my assistant and myself, and we review all the applications, and we're funding not only the arts, but we're dealing with education, science, historical, charitable, social services, you name it, so it's the whole gamut. And we really do not have any preconceived notion as to a percent that is going to go for the arts or go for a particular project. We try and weigh everything at the particular time that we are looking at the applications themselves.
I'd like to inject several comments, if I may. With regard to the arts program, the state program, several things I think are worth saying. The first is that we're very conscious about the available funds and how to stretch those funds out to the maximum amount, as I'm sure you are, Millie, to get as much benefit and as much distribution in a project as we possibly can.
But let me stop you on that, because we're going to look at some very specific slides, and at that time you can show us perhaps how that philosophy is brought forth. We'll be back in 2 minutes. We'll break for a short public service commercial.
You think I don't know drugs are bad news? Man, I passed dealers on my way to school. See guys in the alley doing crack. I even saw somebody get shot. I already know about drugs, but what I want to know about now is, how do these fly?
Our kids have better things to do than drugs, but they need our help to keep it that way.
Tuberculosis used to be a leading cause of death. Today it's highly treatable, and healthy people rarely come down with TB even when they're exposed to it. Still, the number of cases of TB is on the rise, so it's good to know the warning signs. Persistent cough, fatigue, unexplained fever or weight loss, and drenching night sweats are signals to see a doctor. With the right medical treatment, TB can be cured.
For a free booklet with more information, write the Will Rogers Institute, White Plains, New York.
Freddie.
Hi, Grandpa.
Sitting out here by yourself?
No, I'm talking to Chef.
Mind if I join you?
For young and old alike, a healthy, happy pet is a companion for life. See that your pet gets regular veterinary care. A public service message from the American Veterinary Medical Association.
A mammogram can reveal breast cancer 2 years before it's large enough to feel with your fingers. That greatly improves your chance to save your life with less drastic forms of treatment. Get your first mammogram between the ages of 35 and 40, unless, of course, you suspect a problem earlier. Then have one every year or two while in your 40s, and every year after 50.
A mammogram is a valuable tool in the early detection of breast cancer and can help save your life.
To learn more, write the Will Rogers Institute, White Plains, New York.
This is Art Talk, and we're talking about public art today. And my guests are Millie Devine from the Shawmut Bank, Dick Sharpe, architect from Norwich, Connecticut, and Evelyn Smith, the Deputy Commission Director of the Connecticut Commission on the Arts. And we were talking with Dick about a rather philosophical idea of what really is behind the Percent for Art project, how the notion of art is looked upon from the architect's point of view.
Well, I think that for us it's an exciting opportunity to have some participation in enhancing a project that you're working on. And I think, for example, I think all of us have always looked with some enthusiasm to the opportunity of collaborating with an artist in producing some kind of adventure. I remember in working with Marilyn Dittenfass on the Enfield Courthouse, I suddenly realized one day that one of the dilemmas we have is that nobody comes into this building with a smile on their face except the attorneys. And somehow or other, in the entranceway, maybe there should be something that somehow or other breaks up one's preoccupation with a speeding ticket or whatever the disaster is that befalls them. And so we started off in conversations with Marilyn of trying to do something right at the entrance that caught the visitor's eye, and even if it irritated them, that somehow or other disrupted their thinking for a moment. Obviously, I would have preferred if it was something that had a sense of humor to it and made people laugh, but you can't always do that. Because having selected the artist, you've bought the package. I think that's you know, that's
But this
50% of the battle is ended right there.
But one of the place that battle should be fought, perhaps, is in the selection process when that group around the table is looking at slides and wondering whether it should be made out of fabric or stone or inside or outside or where the money should be spent. because once you make the decision about the project, it's true. Now let's take a look at some slides in a moment and be able to see how some of the artists particularly worked out their idea of the expression of a people, of a place, of a community, and of a specific function of a building, an area, in an artistic way. We have some slides of some Connecticut spots. We're going to take a look at them, and the Dintenfest one will be amongst them, where we'll be able to see how and whether this particular piece works with those kind of characteristics that you suggested. We do have a problem with that because very often you drive by a place and you're not going to go into the courthouse. It's not your time to show up and wonder whether you did anything wrong. But a courthouse is a very public kind of place. So let's take a look at some of the slides now and see just whether or not they work. Evelyn, I'm sure you're familiar with every single one of these slides and can tell us some little gossip in the background about it. What is this one now?
This is a work which is at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, and the artist is Nancy Holt, and it's right up the hill from a dormitory. This is a work which has the center circle in it. Well, if you walk up to that circle, you can see West Rock, which is a very famous New Haven landmark. So the artist is focusing your eye and showing you where to look and integrating this piece into the landscape.
And the business of rocks, I just must say, I know this piece, and although the slide stops with only 3 big rocks off to the side there, they go on, don't they, down the side?
That's right.
And wasn't there, in fact, not this piece, but another set of rocks that was talked about and had a great deal of controversy? People can understand the minimalist art approach of using, quote unquote, a bunch of rocks to denote art. When a generation ago the art for public places was, you know, some well-dressed cavalryman, you know, perched on top of a horse. We can easily see how important he is and what he's representing. How does the public get to understand what this piece is representing?
Well, you were talking about the work with the rocks or this Nancy Holt piece?
Well, the particular piece. Let's take a look at the next one, and that is just a question. How does a public get to react, quote unquote, the right way?
Well, let me say that there's your first reaction when you first see the piece and when you sort of walk by it or that sort of thing. That's one thing. There is also the reaction of if you see a piece over and over and over again, it may work on you, and you may see things that you didn't see the first time. And if you're really interested, there are always people around who can tell you about the artist, who can talk about what their background is, what the issues are that they work on, that that would give you some insight into the piece.
The slide we saw just a second ago was an art installation showing just a whole lot of mess going on and all the different kinds of people trying to put something like that together. Let's see the next slide, which will show us more of the finished product of Cynthia Rubin's piece.
All right, Cynthia Rubin used to teach at Connecticut College. She's working with computer-generated artwork, and what you saw was an installation of her mural, which was done on metal, down at Southern Connecticut State University in a building where they taught computer engineering and all kinds of computer courses.
This is a computer?
This is a computer-generated mural. In other words, she makes the image on the computer, makes a slide of it. The slide is sent to a metal fabricator, and it's fabricated in metal, which is a very durable material and which would be desirable sometimes in certain settings where lots of people are walking through the halls, and the work's very accessible. You can go up and touch it, and so that's
there's
that
a
piece.
different media there then that we saw. Now let's take a look at Von Tongeren's piece at Southern.
This is also at Southern Connecticut State University. This is a work in bronze. It's standing outside of a science building, and the artist is showing you Greek columns and an inclined plane and spheres, and he's really sort of suggesting thought and mathematical principles and those sorts of things. This is a very beautiful work which the students at the university have really taken to, and it's been on the cover of their catalog, and they sit around it and that sort of thing.
So this harkens back the idea of the history behind which a present humankind sits.
That's right.
Actually at a university setting where they're focusing on dreams and hopes and a future. So this is a real connecting piece.
That's right.
Where you've come from, where you are, and where you're going. This is the piece that's in the New London courthouse. In fact, some of the people in that picture are courthouse administrators.
That's right. To your left is Judge Handel, and the artist is on the right, and I'm not sure I recognize who's in the middle here, but this is a ceramic mural done by an artist, Elizabeth MacDonald, who lives in Connecticut, and she's doing a landscape. If you can see at the bottom of this mural are the shapes of trees and that sort of thing, and if you go in and look at this mural, it's in a hallway lobby in the courthouse. She's inspired by the Connecticut landscape.
What about the next one now? There we go.
This is also a wall mural. It's up at the University of Connecticut at Storrs in a public safety building. This is an artist who's using bronze and metal shapes and embedding them in the wall. This is an abstract piece, but it's use of materials that we don't often see.
When we look at these pieces and we see all the, this one is fabric actually. We look at these pieces and we see the different medias. How much of that kind of an idea is talked about at the selection committee?
Well, this is a central theme at the selection committee, is the material used, how it will stand up, what the architect's interested in, where the piece will go.
This is actually fabric on canvas.
That's right, and this is at Quinebaug Valley Community College, and they wanted to represent the history of their region, which involves the mills, obviously, and there are two pieces here. We're showing you one, but there are two pieces which are in an auditorium, on both sides of the auditorium.
How about this one?
This is a mural in the natatorium at the University of Connecticut at Storrs, and where they do all their swimming meets, and this mural is on one end of the room, and if you know Yukon, you know the duck pond, and the artist has put ducks in here. He also put a husky, and he's done a lot of things which represent Yukon.
So again, in that image, the arts world around this image sees themselves represented, even specifically, not just in a fantasy kind of way.
Yes, all these works exist in a context. I mean, the artist thinks about that a lot. I think in the 60s you saw a lot of work which were sculpture put out maybe on a plaza, which you couldn't see the relationship maybe to the building or what went on in the building. But I think there's been a movement in public art to move more toward some relevance with the site, its history, its culture, that sort of thing. This is another mural which is in Stamford at a technical high school, and the artist's theme is technology.
So just as you said, that the placement and the specifics of a place is very much thought about in the selection process. This is a very good example. It also harkens back to the history of art a little bit with some earlier 20th century, the look of earlier 20th century pieces of that whole Paul Bunyan-esque kind of art. Here's another
this is that same
one
mural.
Of Rush Brown's.
That's right, the same mural.
Sections.
And this is a representation of Alexander Graham Bell and his wife. And you see the telephone pole in the back and the telephone. The artist represented many pioneers in technology in this mural.
And for a tech school, this is very, very right on to put the heroes of their work, so to speak, right there in the art forms for personal encouragement and enrichment. What about this one?
This is, once again, up at Yukon at Storrs. This is an animal pathobiology building where they do a lot of research on animal diseases. And this is a stained glass window done in very abstract form using red glass and clear glass. And then if you look all the way to the back of the slide, you'll see a sculpture, and that is a bird form. That sculpture was purchased for that space. We don't do that very often, but it seemed very appropriate for this building.
Well, now we can take a look at the people at the Tungsis Community College, the forms outside of the college in Farmington that are both whimsical on one hand and larger than life, of course, heroic people on the other.
I'm going to defer to Dick on this one because he really, from the beginning, he was the architect for this site, and from the beginning, he had a vision of what he wanted to see here, and maybe you could talk about that.
Well, I think that this great courtyard that we created as the focal point for the college had to have life in it all the time. And when we saw Bill King's work, it just seemed reasonable that these larger-than-life creatures, cookie-cutter folks, should be there. And it just seemed like such a natural thing to do, and that it have a little bit of sense of humor to it. And so we did it, and I think it was very successful.
They're wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, this next one is Redzinger, and so many of us have been in the Bradley Airport. I wonder if everyone has taken a look and noticed that it's there and given its presence the appreciation that we want mass audiences to give public art. Tell us about this.
This is by Tim Prentice, who's a kinetic artist, meaning that he always works with sculpture that moves. And that we had this long space, which is in the departure terminal where you pick up your ticket and you go right on the airplane. And there were a lot of intake and exit sort of air vents up high. And so he used that to make a piece which spans the space and it also moves.
Now we have one more slide. Let's take a look and see. This is the Dintenfass piece, Dick, that you were talking about earlier.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think that we had some concern that some important event should take place at the entrance, and Marilyn's work was rather avant-garde and I think quite interesting. It had a lot of motion in its positioning. These are folded. These are porcelain plates or flat discs, or flat pieces of porcelain that have been structurally supported, projected out off the wall. So there's a rippling motion of this material that leads, when you go into the entrance, you have to turn right to go into the court center. And that's where you want everyone to go, and presumably that's part of the sculpture's task, to divert people to turn right and to go into the main lobby area. So in its static nature, it has a lot of motion.
It works?
Yeah, I think it does.
It does work.
Yeah.
Now, but with that slide, it's a really very good way to talk about that idea of does it work. Did that particular piece, abstract as it is, so far removed from the man on horseback announcing what it was doing in the middle of a piazza or a plaza or a town green, the Dintenfass work being so abstract, so far removed from this realism of what a generation ago was used to. How did you work with, you and the selection committee, getting a piece like that out with a message that is abstract?
Well, in the selection process, we went through a large number of reviews and shortlisted 5 or 4, I don't remember how many, but there were sample models made by each of the artists for a proposal for this area. And Marilyn's model was so well detailed that it very clearly, made very clear the nature of the sculpture and how it would work inside there. And because the space has a lot of elements already in it, I don't think anybody felt that it could tolerate a small, detailed, anything of fine detail, because you have the people yet to occupy the space, which would give scale, detailed scale to the space. So the sculpture was just really, it seemed to be the right thing to do. And it seems to have held out okay. I think there was one damaged piece, but other than that, I think that it's done very well.
So there's an educational process then, it seems, from the way you're talking. First, it starts with the selection committee. You talk about what a piece like this might be able to do. You, as a designer, will talk about what you think the space can handle, and who else will be occupying the space. You say students will be occupying the space. And so first you get a whole group of this INSI group to decide and understand, oh yeah, I will know what that piece looks like when it's built and erected on site. And then you feel that from that there's a kind of an osmosis, and antenna will go out to the users of the space so that they will also understand?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's somewhat of a unanimity by the time we get to the end. I think everybody, in my experiences, have had a feeling, yeah, this was the right choice, that it was the right thing to do. And on the user side or the recipient side, I think in general they've been very well. Certainly the Tunx's programs have been well accepted. This is only, the walking figures are only one. I want to take a moment to make one additional point over and above the one I made earlier. Every once in a while I've heard some comment that the selection process is highly political. And I think it's important for me, amongst many, to say and to make a very clear statement that I have never been in a more exhilarating democratic process than the selection of an artist for a project. It is absolutely and completely without any political influence of any sort. There are no favorites played. Everything is on the table on every experience I've had. And I really think that there are lots of artists who, for whatever reason, their nose is out of joint because they feel that they were ignored, neglected, or they haven't gotten a fair shake. And the reality is that a lot of their material may not necessarily be appropriate for a given project or for any project for whatever reason. On the other hand, it is important for artists who want their work known to communicate with a commission on the arts, to see that samples, photographs of their work is included in the catalog itself. Because only then will we know that they exist and what their work looks like. And it gives us a choice. But I want to make the plea and the pitch. This is absolutely not of any political influence whatsoever. It is painfully democratic, if anything else.
Millie, do you have that problem in the private sector?
Oh, yes. We get criticized of playing favorites, and we don't. We try to be as objective as possible. In fact, the bank is the trustee. The bank is the ultimate, has the ultimate decision. But we look to the community to give us input, and that's why we have people on a rotating basis serve on the distributions committee to review the applications.
Now, how about in terms of when you're in selection and you're going to try, the group is going to try to get me, I'm going to play the role now of being on your selection committee, and we've got to choose amongst 4 or 5 or 6 finalists, semi-finalists. Who's going to really get the goal here? How is that done? On what kind of way does one win over another?
It really depends upon how many people are going to be impacted. I hate the expression, but it's the best one to use, the best bang for the buck. And we try to spread the dollars as far as possible to make the biggest impact.
So your criteria then turns out to be people, masses of audience. How many people are going to be nourished, are going to get the use out of this project, whatever the description of the project is.
Exactly. So whether it's a museum or the arts, such as summer music and the tent. Look at the number of people that the summer music brings to southeastern Connecticut.
And the tent itself, the new tent.
That's right. We helped fund that.
The tent that Peter and Cindy Sacco needed in order to keep the musicians could see their scores.
Right. People could hear.
People could hear.
Acoustics.
It could withstand the weather that happens on that point.
That's right.
Every Saturday night, it seems, in the summer, weather happens to come. So there's a problem in, you have very similar kinds of problems.
Exactly.
Do you PR enough so that people know how important these funds are?
I don't think you can ever get enough public relations, but we try. And the newspaper, the Day newspaper, has been marvelous in supporting us and publicizing what we are doing, and even to the 50th anniversary supplement that they did. We did the 50th anniversary brochure, which was published in January. We sent it out to all of the organizations we fund, and even agencies who have applied and who have not yet been funded. I'm always willing to meet with people as long as they can give me enough notice ahead of the deadline.
What about the PR, Evelyn, for the Connecticut Commission on the Arts and the work that various community groups do with the Commission? Is there enough public relations?
Well, we do have someone working on that, public information, trying to get information to people about what opportunities exist at the Commission, as well as what we are doing ourselves and what programs we're running. I think there's always a message to bring, and we try to do as much as we can. We're a public agency, and our offices are open.
In the arts world, it's very difficult for some people to understand that there is not just the kind of catch-can attitude about art, and perhaps some of the problems in the business of blaming one kind of reason or another about one project being chosen, an artistic project over another, has to do with the abstract quality of art itself. I mean, it is not a hard science of which ones are better than others. There is an aesthetic kind of notion to it all, that the more you see, the more you know. There's an experience factor involved in art and an educational factor involved in art. And I think that people, masses of people, for whom this public art that we're talking about today impacts, and impacts purposefully. Public art is art that is particularly placed and designed for the impact of mass audience. Is it possible, do you think, for a profound idea, as the question was asked in the film just a few minutes ago, can a profound idea be delivered to a mass audience without trivializing the idea? There is really a great deal of art and intelligence to go into such a question. Sometimes an answer could be better than another. One use can be better than another use. What do you think?
Well, I think that's something that everybody that works on these projects struggles with all the time. The issue of quality, the issue of communication. And I think that we try the best with the equipment we have and with the culture we live in. But sometimes you don't know. You don't know for 10 years, even 20, 30 years, what you've done. And that's a big issue in the arts. Because things are so lasting, and because the ideas that are dealt with in the arts are ideas which go on over generations.
I want to intervene to offer a comment. I think our most severe critic, in my experience, has been the guards in the courthouse. And either they like it or don't like it, and that's where you score. So I suggest to you that the public has an opinion, and there are sectors of the public that are very articulate about their opinion, the guards being the most severe critics.
I want to thank my guests for helping us with these questions of what art in the public spaces is all about. Millie Devine from the Shulman Bank, and Evelyn Smith from the Connecticut Commission on the Arts, and Dick Sharpe, architect. And thank you very much for watching. We hope that you tune in again next week for Arts Talk, when another interesting subject about the visual arts will be ready to be discussed. Thank you very much.